Good evening. Okay, good evening. We're going to get started. I think we might still have a few folks joining in. Just to let you all know, this session is being recorded and it is going live on Facebook. I am not the person to ask what that means, but that is a great thing, I'm told. My name is Barbie Brashear, and I am with the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. You are here this evening as part of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council's Tools for Change series. This is a new offering that the Coordinating Council is doing virtual to try to increase our collective knowledge of systems responses and a coordinated community response for domestic violence. And basically what that means is, what are all the areas where we need to increase awareness and provide information for our community members around how organizations, systems, and agencies respond to survivors and victims of domestic violence, how offenders are held accountable related to domestic violence, and then ultimately, how do we work collectively as a community to decrease domestic violence and prevent homicide. Our August series, which this is the part 4 of our August series, was postponed a little bit because of Hurricane Laura. So this was meant to be at the end of August and has changed to this evening. But our August series focused on the criminal justice and law enforcement response. Our first few sessions were just basic information. What does it mean when law enforcement responds to a domestic violence survivor? What does it mean when they call 911, someone calls 911, a patrol car responds, what's the patrol response look like? And then what happens when there's an investigation? We had defined terms, provided folks from HPD and the Sheriff's Office provided information. And then we had the criminal justice system. What does it mean to file charges? What does it mean to get a protective order? What's the difference between a protective order and a restraining order? What is a felony charge versus a misdemeanor charge? So it's just basic information. Those sessions were both recorded and can be found on our website at www.hcdvcc.org. And I'm sure Rebecca will put that in the chat for anyone who wants to see that website. The third session focused on best practices and interventions. And Alicia walked us through what were some of the law enforcement responses and what were some of the criminal justice systems responses that are aimed at improving access to services for survivors and offender accountability. Tonight, we are lucky to have in our panel one of the incredible women who actually put in place some of those interventions from the criminal justice system before she went off to bigger and better endeavors in our world, and that's Ms. Carvana Cloud, and she'll be introduced in just a few minutes. But some of the things that she started with the district attorney's office were completely and entirely focused on addressing the homicide rate in Harris County. The domestic violence homicide rate is the highest in the state of Texas, right here in our home, and we are not proud of that, and we definitely want to do something about that. And she hit the ground running when she took the position in the office and dedicated her work to addressing that. So tonight, what we want to focus on is, we've had this basic foundation built for us in the first 3 weeks, right? This is criminal justice, this is law enforcement, these are some best practices. Now what we want to do is take a look at all of those things through a cultural and racial lens and think about what's missing. How does this impact who we're serving? How is who we're serving impacted by these systemic responses, and what do we need to make improvements along the way? And I'm going to introduce Alicia Nuzzi, who is the program director for the high-risk team and strategic partnerships. and she's going to facilitate a panel discussion with a couple of really incredible women that we are so happy to be in the company of and partnership with. So, Alicia.
Thanks so much, Barbie, and good evening. Thank you all for joining us for this last piece of our criminal justice series. I do have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing two incredible individuals who are lending us their expertise, their time, and sharing with us, just an additional things that we need to be mindful of when we're providing services to survivors. As Barbie had talked about, the past couple of weeks, we've shared information that hopefully gave you the basics of the criminal justice system, terms to know, protective tools to understand, law enforcement's response, how a charge gets filed, and then all the different systems that a survivor may have to navigate or engage in if they are trying to achieve safety and security for themselves and their family members. And it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's extremely difficult to navigate if you are just forced into the system and you have no background knowledge whatsoever. 2 weeks ago, of course, we talked about these systems and we shared some information about some of those pilot programs and initiatives that were being created to meet survivors where they were. And as we continue to have larger discussions about what it means, and we're having a racial reckoning right now, and calls for changes and reforms calls for changes and reform grow louder. It's important that we pay attention to these discussions, especially as domestic violence allies, survivor allies. It's important to be listening to what is happening. And so when we have some really fantastic individuals who are going to talk to us a little bit more about why that is important, and why some of these systems that, that often survivors seek for that safety and that security are the same systems that they don't trust or feel comfortable in engaging in. So, again, very, very honored to have these individuals help guide our discussion tonight. We have Dr. Conti Terrell, who is the founder and the executive director of Fresh Spirit Wellness for Women. We have Dr. Nusrat Ameen. She is the Senior Director of Legal Services and Education for DIA. And then we have Carvana Cloud, who is the founder of Community Empowerment Solutions Texas and the Empower Project. So thank you all for being here. And what I'd like to do is just begin with some questions that each of you please feel free to answer. But what I'd like to get a little bit is just some background about who you are, where you're from, obviously the agency you represent, and what propelled you to do work in this field. And let's go ahead and go with Dr. Ameen. Would you like to begin the discussion?
Thank you, Alicia, for introducing us and having us in this panel. I'm very happy to be here tonight. So I was born in Bangladesh, which is a South Asian country, and from childhood I wanted to make a change in people's life who are in need. And as a victim myself, and now a survivor, I know it is not an easy journey or decision to come out to the world and say the things that you're supposed to be private. And I also knew that the importance of the financial independence to take that step. I was married in a very early age when I was in 12th grade in a culture where arranged marriage is common. And from the beginning, I knew that I had to get out of this marriage, and the key was to complete my studies and be independent. So I completed my bachelor's and master's in law in Bangladesh with all the adversity I faced in my abusive marriage, and I did it. And I joined the university, Dhaka University, as a lecturer. I became a survivor. And I decided to do my PhD on domestic violence and law, which was lacking in the country, in Bangladesh at that point. And from then on, my journey to change and work on gender rights never paused, especially when I started to work in DIA and with the minority survivors of color, I realized the need of advocacy and the voices to be heard at the tables that make the change. So I'm Ataya, and it's a South Asian agency, and we help survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. Our work is twofold. We have the direct services where we provide counseling and case management, crisis intervention. And we have, through our preventive work, we do a lot of advocacy at the policy level, and we go into the community and talk about domestic violence and sexual assault to make the community aware of it, and to in pursuit of ending violence against women.
Thank you so much. Dr. Conti, would you provide some background about a little bit about who you are and the agency you represent and what drew you to doing work in this field?
Absolutely. Thanks again, and I do apologize again. I thought it was me, so I'm so glad it wasn't. I apologize for being late. As she said, Dr. Conti Terrell, and founder and president of Fresh Spirit Wellness for Women. I too am a survivor, but I think I was modeling, I owned 2 nail salons, I was going on about my little merry way. And then I ran into who I thought was my knight in shining armor, and he turned out to be my nightmare on Elm Street. So I had no intentions of going back to school and getting a counseling degree, and then a doctoral degree in counseling. But after going through the horrific marriage and having the support of a loving family, I could not help but to think, what about the ladies that don't have this? What about the victims that don't have the support and the financial means? And, and so I found myself in a situation where I did not need a shelter. And my ex-husband was paying for counseling, individual counseling for me, because of course the narcissists think that the other person is the crazy one. And so the counseling helped me to realize, okay, wait a minute, I'm not the crazy one. And so once that started to happen, he no longer wanted to pay for counseling. And so I couldn't find anything that was between a shelter and an individual counselor. My family he was threatening my family to burn my mom's house down. He was threatening all types of things. And so we didn't know how to get a protective order. We didn't know how to do anything. We were just in the blind. We had never experienced anything like this. All of my sisters were married as well. I have 3 sisters, older siblings. None of their husbands were abusive. So we were just, left in the dark. So it spawned the passion in me to want to help other women. And so henceforth, Fresh Spirit was founded. As a matter of fact, it will be 23 years old on the 21st of this month. So we celebrate 23 years in about another week or so. And so week or 2. And so that's just it. It's I pinch myself every day because I'm so thankful that I get to do what I love. That's my passion and my purpose, and it helps somebody, even save lives. So I'm just grateful to be here, grateful to continue to do what I do. You guys are amazing, and I'm also just grateful to be a part of everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Well, we definitely appreciate you, Dr. Conti. Last but not least, we have Carvana Cloud. And Carvana, same question to you. Can you share a little bit more about your background and, your agency and what drew you to this line of work?
I'm happy to. First of all, thank you all for having us. The Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council is a critical system and agency in order to help us all on the community-based side as well as the criminal justice side, make sure we are streamlining access and resources for survivors. And so I couldn't be more proud to be associated with this group and honored to be on this panel tonight, also with 2 other amazing women who honestly I've looked up to for quite some time in this community. As Alicia said, my name is Carvana Cloud. I am the former Bureau Chief of the Harris County District Attorney's Office Special Victims Bureau, which is responsible for the prosecution of domestic violence, sexual violence, and trafficking cases. It was there where I really began to understand and better appreciate the need for our communities to develop a coordinated community response to decrease the homicide rate. And, you know, before I was a bureau chief, I was a line prosecutor. So I had the fortune, I consider it a blessing, to be able to work with clients or survivors on cases who are the victims in criminal cases from the ground up. I started in misdemeanor at that office and worked all the way up to the top, where we were able to be able to have real conversations about how we can make systemic change. And I think that is important, because when you have perspective, when you have worked with victims and you have worked and understood what they need as a baby prosecutor, you are really involved with the case on the ground level. And working with those cases made me even more passionate about wanting to be an agent of change in this community. At that time, though, I didn't realize what exactly or how it would lead, or that it would lead to where we are now. But I also, in addition, obviously, to my prosecutorial experience, have to always honor my mom, who is a survivor. She was the first survivor I have ever met in my life, unfortunately. But she is an amazing woman who was extremely resilient. And I was a child witness to domestic violence in my home. So I bring not only like I said, the professional and educational experience to this work, but I bring real life experience. And I think, like the other women who have shared today, that they are survivors. There's nothing that a textbook can teach you that living it and experiencing it can. And so it's really, I think, again, though it was unfortunate that it had to happen, I'm blessed to be able to take those experiences and transform them into something that can make others' lives better. And that's really, people ask me all the time, Carvana, what do you do? And I said, well, I really don't know my title. I don't know that I have a title, and I like it like that. Because I like to be able to reinvent myself to address the problems or the issues in the community. Person who has absolutely no problem with.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, she's freezing up on us.
That's okay. We'll come back to you, Carvana, in just a second. But thank you all for sharing. I want to talk a little bit more. Obviously, we have a wealth of experience here. I wanted to get your thoughts about what excites you about supporting domestic violence survivors, especially now. Is there anything that's happening now that that excites you about supporting DV survivors? Dr. Ameen?
So for me, it's normally in a normal time to see the strength through their journey and their transformation from the first day that they come with that hopeless smile to the empowered smile. And of course, there are challenges, especially throughout the journey. And especially now with COVID, there is so much of added barriers for them to get in touch with us if there is the abuser present. And we are trying our best. We're learning best practices from all the agencies, and that is the beauty of all the DV agencies, that we are sisters, that we learn from each other how to be creative, to get in touch with them, and how to keep that communication open with them, to let them know that we are here. And we have seen so much of resiliency and the patience and everything that they are going through now with losing jobs, not being able to get out of the relationship, having children, very simple things like how the children will do the online education. So from very simple thing to the most dangerous thing of being hurt or potentially being hurt by the abuser, it is a very difficult situation and challenging situation they are here now. And to see that strength in them, that is what keeps me going, and that is what excites me, and that is what makes me remain in this field to help them.
And Dr. Ameen, I think I'm so glad that you brought up, I mean, I said excites, but this is an interesting time in that it is producing all of us to think a little bit differently about how we would normally provide services to our survivors. And so I appreciate you sharing, talking about that, and then also making sure that we talk a little bit about what's discouraging about our time frame right now, and obviously working with the backdrop of a pandemic. So I appreciate. While it is kind of exciting on so many levels because we're seeing so much collaboration and the need for that, we can't forget that it's also extremely taxing for all providers right now, just because of the stretched resources and just the needs are so great. Dr. Conti, the same question kind of to you as well. I mean, what is discouraging but also kind of exciting about supporting domestic violence survivors right now?
I think that I can definitely echo Dr. Ameen. It's always exciting to see their strength. It's always exciting to see them get to a point where we see them, because usually they don't see themselves getting out. They don't see themselves overcoming. So it's exciting when we're able to show them and walk through that process with them, and they get to see that they can survive. During this time, it's also, although we're all having to pivot, it's also very exciting to see how well we are still able to offer services, and in some cases even better. So that's the amazing thing, that we're able to pivot and do Zoom and support groups. And so, I was telling someone earlier today that when and if and however this ever ends, that we will definitely at Fresh Spirit have to have a couple of days of virtual services and other few days of in-house services. And so who would have ever thought that? So that's very exciting. And it's very discouraging, of course, when we do get the clients to finally get on the bandwagon that, yes, I can do this, I can leave. And of course, the justice system lets them down. So that can be very discouraging. But overall, I love to see the strength. I love to see them overcome and become overcomers. That's very exciting.
Thank you. And Carvana, would you like to comment on this as well? Like, what are you seeing? What's exciting, and what's also, of course, the challenges that we all have in doing this work. So many, it's so great. But what do you think about where we are right now?
I think this time, especially as America is wrestling with how to deal with the social justice issues and the racial tensions that are ever dividing us as a country, no matter what, domestic violence is going to affect everybody. And like we all know, it affects everybody across racial, socioeconomic backgrounds and all of that. So that's the one thing that we know for sure. And unfortunately, that's not partisan. It's not about a political party. It's not about a particular zip code. It affects everybody. Now, we do know, however, that the data shows that it disproportionately impacts people of color. And so this is why I think it's really important that we have conversations like these, because, and I think somebody may have mentioned it earlier. If not, I'll mention it now, because I talk about this very openly. When the anti-domestic violence movement started in the 70s, it really was started by white feminists who didn't really have seats at the table for folks that looked like the three of us on this panel. So we weren't able to share our thoughts and offer cultural perspectives and things of that nature. And I think that actually set the movement went back a little. And so we're in a time now, because of course, folks like Daya and Dr. Conti with Fresh Spirit, they were trailblazers in that they recognized that years ago and said, hey, you know, we're out here, we're going to be here for folks. And that makes a difference because we're serving communities that have issues with calling the police when violence occurs, or reaching out to shelters for fear of being judged or mistreated or misunderstood. But when you have people in front of you that are trying to help you, that look like you, that come from your neighborhood, or that know what your situation is like, it's a lot easier to relate. And so I think that it's very exciting in this particular time that we're in. Again, it's very polarizing and very racially divisive to be able to have these conversations and really amplify the need to have more culturally specific responses and encourage more cultural humility, period, in the work that we do, even in mainstream shelters. And I think the most exciting piece for me as a new baby to the community advocate scene with my agency, The Empowered Survivor, is seeing the growth in people. Absolutely watching, it's like watching, you know, a caterpillar turn into a butterfly. And I didn't have the benefit, I don't think, of always seeing that on the criminal justice side. And I've learned that that really is just one piece. I've always known that, but now walking with folks hand in hand and seeing them go from, you know, what happens after they make that 911 call, or if they don't make that 911 call after that incident, and how they navigate through getting shelter and protective orders, and sometimes civil advocacy on legal for legal divorces and things of that nature. Is just amazing to ultimately watching them, you know, come out on the other end with, you know, a job, education, a car, and the ability to take care of themselves and be self-sufficient. Those are a lot of the reasons why people don't report domestic violence in the first place. And so I think that while we are in very, very, very difficult times, and obviously the pandemic has contributed to the increase of domestic violence, and we all have experienced that in all of our different agencies, we do need to celebrate the opportunity, like Dr. Conti even said earlier, being able to do things differently. When I was at the DA's office, one of my dreams was to have protective orders done via platforms just like this. I wanted those interviews to be conducted virtually because it was too much of a stressor for women to take off from their jobs, or for survivors to take off of their jobs to come downtown to wait in a waiting room all day long. And so, you know, it's happening. And so we find the good out of a very bad situation, and we're reaching more people. And that's what it's about. I think we have to realize that it's not really about how we, you know, it's not about us at all, but it's about us working to help people who need the help. How can you give a hand up? How can you reach back? And I think that if we keep that in mind, we will be able to help the movement catch up and really encompass and embrace those survivors who really have been left out and unheard.
And I appreciate you bringing that up, Carvana. I mean, I think to help with our audience, I think it's important that we talk a little bit more in depth about some of those reasons why. What are some of the challenges that your clients have that the general public may not be thinking about or know about?
Sure.
You know, Dr. Ameen, do you want to speak to that to kind of share with our audience a little bit more about some of the challenges?
Yes, so I would love to talk here about, and Carvana, you pinned it so nicely and so succinctly about that is what we want to talk here about, right? And we know as a minority and you know, from a from a community of color, how it is so difficult for us to even speak out, and let alone the survivors. When the survivors have all these barriers with language and immigration and economic and other barriers, it is very difficult for them to even come out and to have that faith in the law enforcement, in the mainstream agencies, to talk about their issues. There's a lot of, as you said, that we have to have that cultural competent lens to see how we can help. And there is an intersection between that racial justice and how one view the law enforcement and related justice. And we often hear from the police that the survivors of color will not leave and or return back to abusers. So, why even take that, as an issue? So we have to understand to what extent there is the intersection of social justice and the role of criminal justice system. But it is interesting to observe the immigrant survivors' expectations and the system's responses. So there's so many studies out around these issues. And in 2015, there was a survey by ACLU that shows deep concerns about bias and police treatment of victims from women of color. And in New Orleans, for example, 83% of domestic violence misdemeanor cases were dismissed. And there are surveys in 2017 on 715 advocates around the USA, all the states, 46 states, that show 62% of the survivors had fear in applying for immigration or had questions of their safety. And 43% of the advocates worked with the immigrant survivors who dropped the civil and the criminal cases because they were fearful to continue with the cases. And we have seen cases, and I'm sure you all remember in this platform about a survivor going for a protective order in El Paso was deported. So that is how, fearful the community is, especially now, to even come forward and seek the help from the criminal justice system. And I'll just cite one of the examples, which is a classic example which fits so rightly into this subject matter, is a case where the client went to the shelter while she was 9 months pregnant with two children, and a case was filed as soon as she went. A felony charge was on the abuser, who was ultimately deported. Now, the client comes and says that she lost all the confidence in the system, saying that she just wanted to end the relationship and she didn't want to, have the spouse deported because she wanted the spouse in the lives of the children and the child that he never got to see. And she wanted to just get the child support and then get out of the relationship and have a healthy relation with the children. And now what has been done? Because the system has taken over and she is questioning, then where is the justice, right? So for her, justice was not served. And it was a very challenging situation for us to make her understand what justice looks like. And if you look at, along with this story and all the researches, advocates always point out that often a police-led approach comes at the expense of other solutions, right? Like funding, shelters, other services, including the legal. And if you look at the Violence Against Women Act, for instance, it provides ample funding for criminal arrest and prosecution, but a smaller amount to the services, and only 15% of the VAWA went to the social services survivors, which is still almost the same. So in reality, we need funding to assist the survivors with supporting services, with pro bono legal aid, and this is all reflective in the nonprofit work that we are doing. So trusting the police is very important, right? The perception is very important when an officer goes into a domestic violence scene. Has to be very trauma informed, and when the officer is at the scene and trying to be in the shoes of the survivor, it may not be 100% possible, but at least to be conscious about this. And so when the officers are going there, not to ask why, but they need to start the conversation with an empathic statement saying that sorry this happened to you, which is trauma informed. I really want to point this in this conversation that I was taking. I took a training last week on law enforcement trauma response, and found this is not very easy. And Carvana can add to it. One officer said that while the office developed a LGBTQ policy, when they went into that community, they learned that it was totally wrong. So they had to learn from that community how to respond. And even in recants, the department said that it is unfounded, but it is not the case when the officers understand that, and they should be understanding. Therefore, a systems change is very important, that the advocates should understand, and they have a great role to play in that. And as for reporting, there's another study by Maryland research that pointed out that survivors of domestic violence are less likely to report abuse when they think that it will lead to an arrest. And research shows that police are often unsympathetic. All our clients say we just want to end the relationship. We do not want to have our spouses being arrested, and then we lose all the support and everything. So as Carvana just said, in the 1970s, domestic violence was not even recognized as an offense, right? And there wasn't mandatory arrest at that time. But now domestic violence calls are, where police are mandated to arrest, and they're not only encouraged, but they're often mandatory. So domestic violence calls, so there was a study by a professor at the University of Colorado, and she has a recent book called Intersection of Policing and Feminism, where she says that these policies ignore the fact that victims may be making a rational choice when they decline to testify to abusers. And domestic violence prosecutions have little benefit to women and in fact can harm them, she explained. But the prosecutors, on the other hand, are saying that they are very convinced that they are saving women's lives. So these mandatory arrests can sometimes harm than cure, right? And by the 21st century, with an increased number of domestic violence arrests of women, many of whom were victims themselves. And forced to comply with mandatory arrests, police arrested women who were acting in self-defense, and sometimes arrested both the parties, and the practice is still very common, and we see this in our clienteles as well. So there can be a lot of reasons beyond it, right? Fear of retaliation. In some of the cases, victims may seem that they need the partners for financial reasons. They need the partners for the children, for the childcare reasons, and other victims, love their partners, or they want to keep them around, and they want them to not to be, in the criminal legal system. So it is very important to understand this intersection of social justice and the criminal justice system. And we all the time hear our clients say that we want justice, and we have to manage the expectations and make them understand what justice looks like, because justice for them looks very different.
Very good information. Thank you so much, Dr. Ameen. I mean, we often say justice means different things to different people. It doesn't necessarily mean, entering one system in getting justice. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Dr. Conti, I'm wondering, I know that we've talked about this in the past as well, just sharing your thoughts about this, some of the challenges and that your clients have shared with you, and going into some of these systems, even turning to some of these systems for help or safety.
I'm so sorry, and turning into the systems for safety?
For any kind of help or safety, like the criminal justice system,
Well, it's ironic. I was looking at the news this morning, and on Fox News 26, they were talking about the problem with this one gentleman who had numerous cases, and he would bail and get out. And they talked about, I literally took a screenshot of it on my phone, and they were saying this morning that, and of course I can't find it now. Yes, 61 people have been killed from being allowed to get back out after having numerous cases of abuse and domestic violence and aggression and aggressive abusive charges. And so that is the scary part and the challenge and the threat and the concern. I was, I think, on one of the groups last week, and I talked about a client who had a abusive partner who had gotten bailed 30 times. And so then when I saw this morning on the news that 61 people have been killed as a result of someone being able to bail out 5, 6, 8, 10, 30 times, that's almost unheard of, who had this terrible history and background. I also spoke about my client who is a teacher and never even had a parking ticket, you know, and her abuser, of course, attacked her, and then during the attack, the glass got broken and he was cut. So he filed charges against her. The neighbor called the police. She turned back around as she was leaving, trying to get away from him. He busted her nose, broke her jawbone. She turned back around thinking the police was there to help her, and she got arrested. And literally, we had to really go back and forth. He had, I think, 9 other cases prior. And of course, I was told that, you know, but I'm saying, well, look at her. She's a teacher. She's never been arrested. She's never had any cases. She's never, and they look at him and and I was told, you know, by the prosecutor, well, we can't charge, and this is something Carvana knows better than me, we can't charge or handle the case based on his past history. But I'm going, why can't you? What is that? You know, and this woman has no past history. And so finally, the prosecutor did drop the case, but as a result, this woman has lost her job, has lost her house, her husband has, her previous child's father has taken her child. All of this, can't get another job because this was still pending. So it's very frustrating and very, very discouraging and heartbreaking for the client. It's like, okay, where's my help? I have the broken nose. I have the broken bones underneath my eye. And, you know, we know that the abuser is very cunning and very manipulative. And he had one witness. And that one witness was his neighbor, a female neighbor, an elderly lady. But he had been grooming her. He takes her groceries in. He helps her get her cleaners out the car. You know, he helps her with all, you know, take her trash to the curb. So she's like, well, I saw them scuffling, and he said that so she corroborated with his story. And so it's very discouraging. And, you know, to try to encourage someone who's going through that it's going to be okay. But the blessing was when they did drop it, she has newfound faith in being with a domestic violence agency. She had an attorney, a court-appointed attorney for the last 6 months who was trying to get her to plea bargain. And I'm like, absolutely not. Plea bargain for what? You know, you are the victim. You plea bargain, this is still going to be on your record. You're still going to have these exact same problems that you're having now for the rest of your life. But she was so exhausted. Had she not been in touch with us, she was so exhausted. She was so hurt. She was about to just like, get it, just let it be gone. I'll figure it out. But this was somebody who has a career, you know, wonderful history record that was about to be tarnished. And I can't help but to see that it's discouraging for them because it's discouraging for us. It's like, how in the world does this happen? So there's many challenges. I do know that we have come a long way, but I also know we have a long way still to go.
Thank you, Dr. Conti. And Carvana, I know that you have, that's partly why you created so many of these initiatives, you know, in the past. I would love for you to kind of add, you know, what your knowledge and what you saw and reasons for why, you know, you wanted to try and start some of these pilot programs.
Well, thank you, because you know I'm over here about to explode. I am just over here about to explode because these two, first of all, dynamic women have just really just done a wonderful job explaining a lot of situations. I want to go back and talk about the Violence Against Women Act and all of the monies that it provides for law enforcement versus social services. I am the founder and executive director of Community Empowerment Solutions, and I also run the Empowered Survivor, which is the domestic violence agency that specifically focuses on providing survivors of color with supportive services, and from housing to counseling and all of that. And I'm very excited about that. But with Community Empowerment Solutions, that's the policy arm of my agency. And we work to talk about and research and think through legislation and policies that exist that we want to either put forth or change in order to push or address certain issues. And we are working right now with the next upcoming session pending on legislation that would actually increase funding for social service agencies, community-based advocacy agencies like ours, to do this work instead of, or in addition to, depending on however, you know, we can get it, all the money that's going to law enforcement. I remember when I was working at the DA's office, we had several grants there that Family Violence Division was blessed to receive, and one of them was for protective order prosecutor. Why isn't the county paying for a protective order prosecutor? Why does the DA's office still have to go and ask for grants for a protective order prosecutor? And that had been the case for like 15 or 16 years. Dr. Conti would love to be able to use $80,000 to be able to provide services such as legal advocacy and counseling for the many women that come through her agency. So would Daya. Daya would love to be able to use more funding to be able to provide immigration assistance and provide U visas and more culturally specific outreach in their communities. But the reality is there isn't enough money. And the money from VAWA was created to go to criminal justice, prosecution, and law enforcement. But that's because we were not having the conversations that would allow people to understand that folks who look like us don't always engage with the criminal justice system. And they don't do that because they don't trust the criminal justice system. I'm not one to hide behind anything. The reality is there. We just completed a survey, a project called the Empowered Survivor Project. And it was entitled COVID and the Black Survivor, where we were very fortunate with the help of this organization, Texas Council on Family Violence, and the Houston Area Women's Center, to be able to provide emergency assistance and relocation dollars to folks who are fleeing domestic violence situations. And when they came to us, they had to fill out a survey. And we asked them, had they ever engaged with law enforcement or had they ever sought the help of a shelter or agency? And over 95% of our participants said no, they hadn't. And why? Because we are proactively identifying folks in communities of color, Black and Latinx communities specifically, who do not want to have anything to do with law enforcement because they are scared that their abuser may be arrested. They're scared they may be arrested, like we heard Dr. Conti say before, because of the historical past that law enforcement has within these cultures. And that's not leaving out the South Asian community. I'm definitely not doing that. But I think when you look at minority communities in general, we'd rather just kind of go on about our way and just kind of deal with things on our own instead of always involving other people. And that's especially the case with law enforcement. We don't want to be judged. We don't want CPS involved. These are all of the reasons why these participants on our survey checked, why they've never sought help and instead suffered in silence. And so if we know better, we should do better. And with over 300 people taking that survey from May to July, we were a brand new agency and have served already over 300 plus people. Why? Because we don't have any problem going into communities where people are, going to churches, going to the dollar stores, going to beauty salons, going to places where we know people are going to go, even in this pandemic. And they're not expecting to see us, but I don't come suited up like I am today. I don't have the pearls on. I'm out there just as Carvana, right? And they give me lots of nicknames. Some I can say on this podcast, others I can't. But at the end of the day, they know if I have a chance to speak with you and you are strong and brave enough, or even give me a little inkling that you're in a bad situation and it involves an unhealthy relationship, I got you. People want to know that you have their back. And so that means having conversations where they can relate and they can understand and they don't feel judged. Right. I don't start off our conversations asking or telling anybody what to do. I say, my name is Carvana, tell me what's going on. And I do a whole lot of listening. I do a whole lot of listening so I can understand, because as everybody said today, we don't have a one cookie cutter approach. Justice looks different to everybody. My two favorite words these days are restorative justice. And people get scared when they hear the words restorative justice, especially coming out of a former prosecutor's mouth, and they go, Carvana, wait a minute, that's not, you're not being aggressive with violent offenders. What is that about? That quite the contrary. Restorative justice allows us to be able to see and create individualized plans for survivors so they can receive justice as they need. So that might look like justice through the civil side with divorces and child custody. That might be criminal prosecution and protective orders, but that might also be escaping, finding safe shelter, getting counseling, and being self-sufficient on their own. Restorative justice is a very comprehensive term, and it forces us to look at domestic violence, not only from a criminal justice perspective, but a public health perspective. Our entire program is based on the 5 social determinants of health that the Center for Disease Control say are very critical to making sure people have safe and healthy conditions where they live, work, and play. Those are access to education, economic stability, social and community, neighborhood environment, and access to health care. And if you think about it, the root causes of a lot of crime, a lot of violence, and even poverty fall within one of those 5 areas. And so I was so excited and energized about the survey because it actually validated the research that's already been done. We heard from people in our community that yes, they need job training, GEDs, they need jobs, they need health care, they hadn't signed up for benefits, don't know how. And with this online virtual situation, a lot of parents don't even have the education or the experience to be able to train and help their children get through this virtual environment. We didn't even think about that. So they are working through their own pain and trauma, as well as trying to get these children educated, for example, at home and in a virtual learning space, and that's difficult. So when we see, again, problems or issues that arise as a result of unhealthy relationships, abusive relationships, it's up to us to change the status quo and shift. That's why I love being able to reinvent myself, because when you're able to shift the conversation, when you're able to change that paradigm, you come up with programs like the Domestic Abuse Response Team, which is a crisis response team that was developed in Los Angeles, but that we brought here to Houston and is being run by the Houston Police Department, simply because law enforcement officers are not social workers. They are not trained. They're juggling a lot of different balls. And I have the healthiest respect for law enforcement. I have family that are law enforcement officers, very proud members of the Houston Police Department. But I have had conversations with them as well. And they actually agree. The more support that they can receive from folks like us, community advocacy organizations like us, and other victim service providers, the better. So DART does that. DART provides victim advocates and pairs those victim advocates up with police officers to bring safety and trauma-informed care to domestic violence crime scenes. It's a wonderful program that really allows a softer, more warm handoff or transfer to folks like Dr. Conti and Daya and my agency, like the Empowered Survivors, so we can continue the work. Because, once 911 is called, The police show up, that abuser may go to jail. But if we leave that survivor there just on her own with the blue card, and she has to navigate all that on her own or his own, that in and of itself can be very overwhelming. But programs like DART don't just leave her with the card, they connect her. They connect him to the services they need to be better. Once the sirens leave, once the lights go off, we pick up from there. And agencies like ours need to be funded and be in a position where we can continue to do that real work, because they are just starting. And if they don't on their journey to healing, and that's what restorative justice is about. It's restoring that survivor from the point of their brokenness. And that brokenness could have started when they were a child. Many survivors come to this space having been broken and abused from childhood. So they're packing that. Then they're more vulnerable if they're depending on their abuser for a lot of the reasons that we've said earlier. And so being able to offer services allows us to be able to restore them to a place of independence and freedom and sustainability. And I think that's the part that energizes me the most. And so this legislation, and I hope that others will join us, will be able to help lobby this as we get electeds on board to talk about how we can increase these services on a national level. This is something that I've had conversations with UJIMA, which is the national center dealing with domestic violence for African American women, and others across this country, because we need to have more dollars and services to support the work that all of our agencies are doing, because we are doing the lion's share of the work. And it's not required or necessary always that it's connected to the criminal justice system. And I think the restorative justice lens, the public health lens, gives us a different way of looking at that. So it's exciting to be able to do that. And it's exciting for us to be able to keep pushing forward.
Thank you so much.
I just have one quick example to sum up everything that she said when she talked about the cultural and the cultural fear. And we had a client that did not score high on the information for the housing. And I have videos of her being beat and dragged out of her house, out of her bed, him abusing the children, all types of things. And so she was applying for rapid rehousing, and she scored very low. And I asked, well, you know, how is this? And so what we did was we re-asked the same questions that was asked of her by someone else. And when she said to us what she said to them, I understood why the score was so low. But I asked her, why do you have these answers? And I'm looking at this video. And she says, Dr. Conti, because the very first time that I talked to someone for help and to try to get into a shelter, they asked me some of these same questions. They asked me, had he abused my child? When I said yes, they said, okay, I have to call CPS. So she hung up. Then she said, they asked me about him, you know, the abuser, and I didn't want the police to go. I didn't know if they were going to send the police to go and get him. And I didn't want him to be killed by the police, and I'm already out of the house. So those fears are not every culture's fear. And she's right when she talks about the restorative justice. I'm having to restore her to know that, help her to understand that this, first of all, is abuse. She lied about domestic violence. Not lied, didn't understand what domestic violence was, first of all. And then when she understood what it was, she was afraid to be honest about it because she didn't want him killed and she didn't want her children taken to go to CPS by CPS. So.
Thank you so much.
Alicia, may I just add one thing? Kudos to the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council as well for, you know, just embracing the concept of a high-risk team model and expanding that throughout the county. The high-risk team is dedicated to making sure that the folks who are the most vulnerable at the highest risk for continued abuse, thank you, thank you, or lethality can be supported. And I know there's a lot of different thoughts and frames of mind when it comes to prioritizing care. But if we really, I'm in the homicide reduction business, and that's what I should say. But that's a killer when you go to happy hours. Nobody wants to tell. They're like, wait, who are you? You're weird. But no, I want to see less women die, especially less women of color. They look like me. They are, that bothers me. And it bothers all of us. And so I think that we really, really, really need to continue having and expanding the high-risk team model that brings in not just, law enforcement, but the community and our judges. And we use tools like, the danger assessments to help inform bond conditions and bond. And let's get our judges to understand that better. But we can't work in silos. We have to continue to work together, and the high-risk team model brings everybody together. And I tell all my friends that are judges and judicial who are on the bench as well, just, think about the danger that some of these folks are in when you're giving bonds. And I'm not, again, each situation is different. And when I say restorative justice, I'm not advocating for violent people to be let out of jail with no accountability. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying we have tools out there that can inform the decisions that our judges make. They don't have to do it on their own. And we have to balance all of that with people's constitutional rights. I obviously understand that as well. But if somebody is at a high risk of danger, like Dr. Conti just mentioned earlier, there need to be more enhanced conditions of bond, higher bonds, or perhaps no bond. All opportunities need to be considered fairly. And again, this can't become such a political issue that we forget we're talking about human life. The sanctity of human life has no P, no D, no nothing. It's not a partisan issue, like I said before. And so let's get back to protecting people, because when we do that, we have safer, stronger individuals, and we have safer communities. And that is what we all want, right? To live in communities where we feel safe. So just a plug there for the high-risk team and the danger assessment models, and incorporating more of those in Harris County. And hopefully one day we'll have a domestic violence court in Harris County. I feel very strongly about that as well, because a lot of folks are struggling with the current system and not having a dedicated court or resource opportunity to go to on the criminal side. And so I think as we talk about ideas and innovations for change, we should consider that as well.
This is great. Dr. Ameen, last comments?
Yes, I would really love to add to all of that. Was Carvana, you're fantastic. I wish we could just make photocopies of you and have like thousands of Carvanas that can help us because you understand, right? But when I'm talking about this client, the client that I just mentioned, whose spouse was reported and all, I think of a transformative, justice system rather than the restorative, because I have a legal background, I have a legal hat, but at the same time I have a advocates hat. So I want to combine these two, and I think that when we are thinking of trauma-informed, survivor-focused healing, it is first and foremost essential to recognize that these transformative justice practices need to support the survivors by reinforcing the autonomy and for them to make the decision and to have that options. To provide that options, because criminal justice, restorative justice, what happens is that it re-traumatizes the victim if the act is even reported to the police and if it doesn't provide them remedy. So we can combine these two. For example, if a person is really in need of a protective order, whether we are also thinking of the other services that can be given to provided to her. For example, if the abuser is in the jail, who's going to provide the mortgage? Who's going to provide the rental? Who's going to provide the utilities? Who's going to provide the child care, and so on and so forth. So it is all together that that we can think of combining these two, and then having this trauma-informed, survivor-focused healing process to happen only when these are all combined together. And of course, there's community accountability and the collective action that we are all here together, and we have to find out the root causes that have led to this violent and oppressive environment for the marginalized communities, and then focus on that to start our process. And also, of course, last but not the least, to recognize the cultural differences. So I think, Carvana, you put it so well, and Conti, your example was so important to understand how it is so difficult for a client even to say that my child is being abused, because the CPA is going to be involved, right? And for this client, for this client who, as I mentioned, went to the shelter, and when she said about the abuses, immediately the DA's office was involved, immediately the criminal justice was involved, and there was a felony charge, and this person was deported while she didn't want all these things to happen. It just happened, right? Because she was just into the system. So how can we as advocates think in a way that we can give a solution that the survivor will also have an option to say yes or no?
Right, because she definitely need housing, but she said no based on her fear of what could happen with her children, her family.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, she's in a hotel right now because we helped her get away from him. So yeah, we got to figure out some ways.
Yep, absolutely.
This has just been an incredible conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists for participating. Dr. Ameen, Dr. Conti, Carvana Cloud. I mean, you all have just brought such great information and great discussion tonight. Thank you so much for participating in this final final session that we have for this series. I know, Barbie, you had a couple of things that you wanted to share as well.
Yeah, I get emotional thinking about the three of you, and just the fantastic passion that you bring. Our world is a better place for the three of you, and I just really hope you know that, like really truly know that. Women and children are forever changed because you're touching their lives and supporting them and giving them voice and helping them find some darkness or some light in all of the darkness. Like that's not to be taken lightly. And the coordinating council is here to support you. That I hope you know that, and want you to know that we don't have all the answers, but we're certainly willing to help find them and share whatever we have. I will tell you two pieces of news. One is that we're probably going to get some county dollars that will continue to help support you. So be on the lookout in the next few weeks for some funding to push your way. And it's going to be a significant portion of funding. So that's pretty darn exciting. Hugh, yes. The second is we're about to get our contract to actually open up more housing. So we're trying to find solutions to that. And at the same time, we're also working with the Coalition for the Homeless and their plan for COVID relief for housing, and trying to make sure that survivors that you all are working with have access to that additional resource as well. So we're continuing to look for things and certainly want to push them that resource your way. And then lastly, I think, Thisha, you and I have been talking about this for a long time. How do we support people that are doing this work in ways that really are meaningful and powerful? And we've tossed around, how do we support communities of color and leaders in that community? And we have lots of work groups and lots of different kinds of offerings. We have an Investigators Alliance, We started a Survivors Alliance that's kind of taken a hiatus because of COVID. But what we don't have is a Working in Communities of Color Alliance. And I'm feeling like that's a great space for, I mean, that's what's coming up for us as we're kind of thinking about this. And can we use that and your expertise to look at each of the systems, you know, law enforcement, criminal justice, service providers, healthcare providers, CPS, which is what we're doing with community safety assessment approach with, you know, but taking that lens of communities of color and underserved communities and unserved communities. And I think that might be our next alliance that we form. And I'm hoping that maybe the three of you would be willing to lead that charge with us and help us figure that out. So just putting that into the universe. As Carvana would say, I'm putting it out there. We'll see what happens.
That's
Speak it
wonderful.
into being.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Alicia, did you want to say anything before we close?
No, great information, and definitely I believe that needs to be the next project. We actually have someone who is watching from our Facebook audience. Had an opportunity to talk with her. I won't say her name because I don't have her permission to say her name, but there are people who are doing some really great work out there, and they just don't have the support. You know, when she reached out and I actually gave her a call back, she was like, "Oh my God, you actually called me back." And she was almost in tears because I called her back. And she is doing some amazing work. It is herself and 3 other people that are volunteering with her. She is a survivor who fled another state to come here to Texas. And I believe for about the last past year, she's been doing the work, but she is being very innovative. I mean, she has families that she has created collaborations on her own, nothing formal, with a local hotel that is housing families that she is literally rescuing, just her and 3 other people. And so definitely want to connect her, because I think when I share with her about the work of Fresh Spirit, I share with her about the work of what that Carvana is doing, and she's like, "Oh my God." But this woman is doing work that is amazing. Talked to a young woman this morning, and you know, and again, I'm going to be doing an introduction to the community for her, because she again is a survivor. So there's lots of people who are doing work, and they're just saying, we want additional training. We want the opportunity to be able to be connected to larger agencies so that we can be like a pass through. So there's work, there's grassroots that's happening in communities of color. And, you know, and here's a gap that we've recently discussed, is the gap in the Hispanic Latinx community. You know, we have one of our advocates here. And so I think that there's work there that needs to be done, because we had conversations last year that we know that based on police reports that those, the help-seeking behavior within the Hispanic Latinx community has tremendously fallen down. And when I, you know, so here's the question: who's doing that grassroots work? I know that we've got people who are doing that grassroots work in the Black community. What is happening in our Hispanic Latinx community? What's happening? Are there other people in the South Asian community? And so I think all of us coming together, I think, is extremely important.
You know, there's lots of incredible women sitting around this Zoom platform. We have our mother, Toby, Dr. Myers, sitting with us, who all of us are here because of you. I hope you really know how much you are loved by us. And I think I speak for all of us. Yes. Much love for you. Toby, you have created very fertile ground for the growth of all of us to continue the work that you've started. So thank you for that. Dr. Beverly McPhail is also here with us. And again, you know, your work is incredible in the work of domestic and sexual violence, and your voice and your advocacy and your writing and your research. We are all better because of you as well. Constance Rossiter, I see your name here. You've been in our community for a long time. You've been a champion for immigration and VAWA protections and so many things for our community. So thank you. And Therese Baget, who's soon to be Dr. Baget, who continues to champion so many causes in the education field, and we certainly are much better for you. We have Leslie Ribeiro, who's been working in this field almost 20 years. She's a caseworker extraordinaire. My words will never do you justice, my friend. She's working one-on-one with women. And then Susan Hickey, who's also one of our advocates, is here. I think of all of you, and I don't want to leave out Keisha and Alicia and Rebecca. Thank you for what you do. Carvana, Conti, Nusrat, thank you for taking so much time. Thank you for your passion. I am so honored to be in this space with all of you incredible women. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbie.
You're welcome. Mwah. All right, ladies.
Good night.
Get some rest because we're doing some hard work.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
Bye. Good night.